Science Minds. Today I'm very pleased to be joined by Dr. Brian Boyd. So welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks a lot for coming. So let's just kind of jump into stuff. I want to maybe zoom out to sort of the beginning of your career. And I'd really like to hear sort of what inspired you to pursue a career in academia and in the field of special education and disability and autism.
Those are good questions to think about one's beginnings. So what led me into this career was sort of actually a psychology course. And back then it was called abnormal psychology, not a great title. But in that abnormal psychology course at the time, and this is the late 90s, there was about a paragraph on autism. And really, at that time, it really was a paragraph. And I don't know what it was about that paragraph, but something about reading about autism sort of stuck with me. And I searched online. This was before Google. Can't remember how we searched, but we did search. And probably because of proximity to where I was, I went to college in Virginia. What popped up was a summer camp called the Autism Society of North Carolina, called Camp Royal, that was managed by the Autism Society of North Carolina. And I decided to apply to be a camp counselor. And it was my first exposure that I knew of to autism. To my knowledge, I had not met an autistic person until then. And I was there it was 10-week summer camp, and there were autistic people of varying ages, varying ability levels. And there was something about it that just stuck with me, that experience, that immersive experience. And as part of it, some of the psychology interns who were working with the Teach Autism program at the University of North Carolina would come out to support us, sort of young campers, and sort of provide us some support. And I said to one of the psychology interns, I think I want to keep doing this, keep working in the field. I'm going to be graduating from college soon. And that person said to me, you should contact Gary Mezebov. I had no idea who Gary Mezebov was or what his name meant to the field of autism, but I cold called Gary Mezebov and left a message, and for some reason Gary Mezebov decided to call me back. And he essentially kind of gave me a job over the phone. I interviewed, to some degree I came down and visited, but he hired me, and that led me into this really neat position at the Teach Autism program in North Carolina. And one of the things I did when I was there was start a preschool, not me alone, but me with some other people, for two-year-olds who were autistic. And at the time, this was a time when not a lot of two-year-olds were being diagnosed with autism. But someone there who was helping out in the preschool was getting her PhD in special education. And to some degree, seeing her work with young autistic children and just hearing about the kind of research she was doing sort of inspired me to think about a research career and continuing my education in this area. So really it sort of started with being a camp counselor to ending up working with a program that was so known for autism and autism research, in particular in the state of North Carolina. And that sort of was my foray into this space. So
that's awesome. Yeah. That's really cool. As we're moving forward now, I'm sort of interested in the trajectory of your career so far. I feel like my reading of a lot of your early work is pretty kind of straightforward autism research, kind of classic, just good methods and looking that way. But you've sort of branched out in a lot of really interesting, cool directions, thinking about methodology, thinking about intervention, as well as now this trajectory into more of like an equity focus and with a really sharp equity lens to your work. And I'm interested to hear your reflection on that trajectory and how you've sort of weaved your way through to the point that you're at in your career now.
One's research career is a journey that sometimes mirrors your own personal life journey that you're on. You really can't separate your identity in terms of who you are and how you see yourself from your research career, and sometimes those two things end up being married. So I'm an applied researcher. So my first area of research that I started with was around repetitive behaviors and sensory interests of autistic children. And that work came from the 2-year-old program, actually. And I've told this story a lot, but one of the moms of the 2-year-olds in the classroom said to me that her son's first word was some approximation of pentagon. And if you know anything about sort of neurotypical child development, that's not a usual first word. It's something like mama, baba. Yeah. And she said before her son said pentagon, he could point out the shape anywhere in his environment. And I thought, wow, what is it about that focused interest of pentagon that was so motivating that it would be this child's first word? And so that story really led to my early interest around sort of focus interests and sensory interests of autistic children. And so that was a lot of my early work in conjunction with sort of some good mentors in the field, Grace Biernick and Jim Bodfish, looking at those areas, and I continued that research. And then, I ended up doing some classroom-based intervention research, in part because my background was special education, and I had been in classrooms with autistic children, and sort of wanted to think about how we could both support children, but also support teachers who are working with autistic children to really do more evidence-informed practices. So that became a big part of my work, just because of my own background. But as I went along in my career, personal things began to happen. And one of those personal things that happened to a lot of us in America was the killing of George Floyd. And at that time, I was asked to write a statement for the International Society of Autism Research by Peter Mundy around the Black Lives Matter movement and how we should be thinking about that within the context of autism. And so I had to sit with what I wanted to say, because I was not doing research around issues of racial equity. I wasn't doing research at the time around black families who had autistic children. And so I had to really think about it. But then I also started to ask myself, why wasn't I doing this work? I occupy this somewhat unique position in the autism field. There aren't a lot of established Black autism researchers. And so I thought, if not me, who? And so I decided that I should start thinking about that work, because I was at a place in the field that I could help to advance some of the discussion around those issues. And so that's why I started to sort of shift my lens, but it's also a part of who I am. I was experienced and have experienced racism in America. So it began to marry my own personal identity with my research identity. And so that's been a really powerful thing for me, and it's really become sort of a driver of the kind of work I do, and a reason that I want to continue on this pathway. So,
well, I've been reflecting a lot about the kind of work that you're doing since we knew that you were going to come here. I've been trying to think about this question, and I've never really arrived at the perfect way to phrase it. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. It's okay. But there's just something that I really admire about what you're doing and the kind of work that you're doing, which to me is it's transcending science in a lot of ways. And there's a handful of researchers who I think are contemporaries of yours in the field. Think of Kristen Botema-Butel, I think, is one who I would kind of put in sort of a similar framework of transcending the research space into the social space, and utilizing, you implied, utilizing the level of your level in the field and the respect that you have in the field to really push the boundaries. And from an outsider's perspective of seeing the kind of work that you're doing and others in the field, it feels like the boundaries of the field are being expanded and pushed. And it's really, to me, it's almost like you're self-actualizing in a lot of really cool ways in this very traditional space. And it feels liberating to me. And I think a lot of other people would probably resonate with that too, of like really the spaces are expanding. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about my interpretation or my thinking on this, but that's sort of from an outsider, from like a white man's perspective of looking at all of this. Like that's sort of what I'm seeing and what's really encouraging and special to me about what you're doing.
Well, I think part of it is that for a lot of us who were trained as more positivists, the idea of science is that it should be objective, and to some degree, you as a researcher should be kind of removed, right? Mm-hmm. And I think where we are is at a place when you're engaged in any kind of work that's about a social justice movement, is that really thinking about how one can use their power and position to really advance important causes. And so I think where I've gotten to is a place where I don't feel like I have to be this objective voice. Why do I have to remove my identity as a black man from the research I do? Me being a black man helps me think about issues of racial equity around black autistic families very differently because I have a lived experience. And so this divorcing of the objectivity of science from these issues, these important issues, these social justice issues and causes, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I think marrying those things together and realizing we all bring biases and assumptions to our research, whether we want to or not. They are operating, often implicitly. And so why not explicitly think about how we link those things? And so I think that's where we're coming to in this research. That's why we need more and should have more autistic researchers helping to advance autism research, because they have a unique experience, right? Yeah. That they can bring, and those things shouldn't be divorced. And I think that's where we are in autism, is really not feeling like everything has to be so objective and from this positivistic lens, and how we can really marry people's lived and real experiences to advance research that we're doing in these kinds of spaces.
Another thing that, we spoke a little bit about this before we started rolling, is kind of the breadth of the work that you do. You have a lot of different areas. You publish very widely, and thinking of like methodology. I know you just recently published sort of new group design research standards, and looking really kind of at the field, I think from maybe above a little bit and holistically. I'm wondering, what do you feel like is going right in the field of autism research right now?
I feel like part of what's going right is that we're having a conversation about important issues. So the neurodiversity movement, profound autism, or however you want to use that label. I think people sometimes feel uncomfortable in these spaces, but having a conversation is actually important. That doesn't mean we're going to end up agreeing at the end of that conversation, but we aren't silencing people. We're allowing people to voice their opinion on these very important topics, because they're going to help us think about the next generation of researchers and how to support the next generation of research, and how to support the next generation of researchers who will be operating in these spaces. So the fact that these conversations are happening is wonderful. The fact that we're thinking about how to do more community-connected research. How do we really think about building those community partnerships from the outset to guide our research, I think are good places that we're in, and that will help the field moving forward. And I think whenever you're in these spaces where people are advocating for issues of social justice and rights, you're going to have difficult conversations. You're going to have conversations that make you feel uncomfortable. You're going to have conversations that may even make you feel like you're not sure you belong in the space anymore. But that's okay. That's okay. And we just have to understand that we're sort of in that moment, but it's all going to do, I think, great things for more autistic people than fewer autistic people, right? If we can have these conversations with one another. But having the conversation is important.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The last question, and again, just building off of this, what is exciting to you, or are you sort of see as the future and the direction of autism research moving forward? What is like, I think just what's exciting to you about the future?
Well, it's not even work that I'm doing, so I think the focus on adults and aging with autism is really important and exciting work that we probably should have been doing a very long time ago, because we always knew autistic people grew up. So I think it's important for the autism community and for the research community that we start thinking about that in different ways. I will say I do think the work that I and others are doing around intersectional identities is really important. What does it mean to be autistic and a person of color, autistic and a sexual or gender minority? Understanding those intersecting identities, because people with autism are not in a monolithic group, right? They're diverse in many ways, so understanding the diversity and complexity of autism is really important from this applied perspective. So those are some of the things that I'm excited about, I think are headed in a better direction. And even the kind of way we are going about and thinking about interventions and supports, and how we sort of really use the experiences of autistic people to sort of come up with or investigate those, but also use the experiences of people who may already be operating in that space. So how do we support teachers and what they're doing and some of the strategies they're using, and investigate those instead of coming in with sort of a helicopter science perspective where we as the researchers say, here, do this, right? Versus understanding what's already happening within a context and really scaling that up. So.
Well, it's just been such a great time to talk with you, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's great meeting you and talking with you.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.